Most bipedal combat robots are incomprehensibly stupid. And no, you will not change my opinion on this, opinion. They're dumb. They are recursively stupid. Bipedal combat robots, in the circumstances where they are most likely to be deployed, are just incomprehensibly dumb. Now, I did say at the beginning of this, most. And I do hold to that, because bipedal combat robots that the Humi slots into kind of like power armor, well, that's fine, because then the Humi can use the same basic weapons that the Humis are already using. And in the same kind of vein, bipedal combat robots that are functionally human-sized, or maybe up to 2 times human-sized, can still use basically Humi combat weapons, so the standardization aspect makes perfect total sense. Bipedal combat robots on the scale of Mech Warrior or Battletech or so forth and so on, incomprehensibly, indefensibly dumb. There is no reason for a bipedal system. You would go for a tripedal or a quadrupedal or even like a hexapodal or an octopodal or something like that. Redundancy is wonderful. And this isn't even getting into the technical aspects of anything that would make bipedal combat robots functional, would make tanks so amazingly terrifying that, bipedal combat robots would exist. They'd be rare, they'd be odd, they'd be edge case, they'd be strictly confined to specialized circumstances, and, nobody in the Battletech / MechWarrior universe likes to hear that, so here we are, screaming into the void. But all that said, I would like to offer up an olive branch right after this break. Any ship left on the dock for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Welcome to Sacred Cow Shipyards. See, my primary complaint with bipedal combat robots is actually the bipedal aspect. How infrequently does the bipedal locomotion system on your planet actually happen? Really? Not that often. Most oftenly, most organisms on your planet have lots of legs! Terrifying numbers of legs! And there's a whole pile of reasons for this to have happened this way, but there are 2 big ones that are specifically relating to, bipedal combat robots. Notably, a bipedal system is inherently unstable. Like it or not, you are constantly having to adjust your balance as you are walking, as you are even standing, simply because 2 points of contact, even with your big old flat floppy feet running around, is not actually that stable. 4 points of contact? Yeah, you're good to go. No one cares. 2 points of contact? Not so much. And the second big reason, which I mentioned previously and I will mention again because it is significantly important in the space of combat, is that redundancy is king. There is a reason, for example, that USA and Navy warships have so many different switchboards and power grids and power plants and propulsion systems and this, that, and the other. Now, in terms of tanks and stuff, you're basically confined to the 2 tracks, fine. But those tracks are in armored encasing systems, whereas the mech legs are just dangling out there. And sure, the Mech Warrior fans can say that there's armor mounted on those legs and that makes them better. Okay, fine, put the armor over the tracks. Again, the same tech that makes Mech Warriors good could be applied to other systems. And, okay, fine, the legs are armored. Add more of them. In case one gets shot off, you've still got spares. And in that regard, like I said, my olive branch is none other than the mountain terrain armored transport from Star Wars. And I know technically it's almost entirely from Legends at this point because Disney has not dug it out of the back cabinet yet. Because all Disney does now is decanonize all of Legends and then pull interesting things out of Legends when they can't come up with a good idea by themselves. So I am certain that eventually the MT-80 will show up in Disney canon, but sadly it's not quite there yet. In the meantime, this thing is utterly terrifying and exactly what I expect out of a multi-limbed combat vehicle. To begin with, this thing is hot dropped in. It is launched onto a planet by way of a cocoon pod, similar to those employed by the Arakid Viper probe droid. So yes, if you're a Helldiver fan in the audience, and I'll admit that I am taking a break from that game, you'll love this vehicle because it hot drops in same as you. In fact, it basically has the same identical gel thermal dispensers as well as gel inertial dampeners, and it has its own sublight engine in case you have to launch this thing from a far long distance from the planet you want to land on, and it has ion drives and a navigational droid brain, which is sadly, installed in the very tip of the cocoon pod, so it's very clear that the navigational droid brain is not intended to, survive landing. Awkward. But anyway, so assuming this thing lands properly and deploys properly, it is 15 meters in length, 12 meters in width, and 12 meters in height. And it's octopodal, I don't know. It has 8 legs. Although amusingly, its commonality with the arachnids, the spiders on your planet, basically ends there. Because spiders really only have 2 major components to their bodies, discounting their legs, their 8 legs. They have the cephalothorax, which is basically their head and their core body, and then their abdomen, which basically makes up the big sternal part that you see on spiders on a regular basis. Whereas, for example, ants, which are hexapodal creatures on your planet, have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen, and the MT-80 basically follows this basic premise of design, in that at the front of the core vehicle there is the, command pod, which honestly is obviously the head, and underneath this head is mounted 2 laser cannons, and then moving backwards there is the drive pod, which is obviously the thorax. It's hysterically unclear what the drive pod actually does. It is the attachment point for all 8 limbs on the MT-80, so maybe the drive pod just drives the 8 limbs. Maybe there's some anti-gravity going on, or maybe there's even thrusters or something going on to help this vehicle, because we'll get into how this vehicle is kind of crazy in just a few minutes. But still, it's called the drive pod, and it's really not abundantly obvious what's going on there. And then finally, we get back to, the abdomen proper, and that's actually the cargo pod on the MT-80. It does in fact have a cargo ramp that folds down, and it can disgorge anything from, obviously cargo to troops to droids to whatever else you want to carry in the back of this nightmare vehicle. But really, I guess I've been underselling this vehicle so far, because all I've really told you is that it's approximately half the length, half the width, and half the height of an average AT-AT. So it's like 1/8 the volume of an AT-AT, and only has apparently 2 laser cannons to its name right now, whereas the AT-AT is significantly more heavily armed and definitely armored than this MT-80. Well, this is where the wheels come off the caravan or the train, or, in this case, this thing doesn't actually have wheels, so it gets kind of exciting. We have repeatedly mentioned that the MT-80 has 8 legs available to it, and all 8 of those legs end in what are called adjustable foot pads. As you might imagine from its, name, mountain terrain armored transport, this thing is literally designed to climb up cliff faces by way of little grabby feet at the end of every single 8 of its little legs. They're very grabby. They're very spiky. They would totally do really, really bad things if they, closed to a point and shoved through a human's thoracic cavity. But that's not actually the worst part of the legs. See, each of those legs have a primary joint at the drive pod, call it a hip joint for lack of a better term. And then there's another joint out from the hip joint, call it a, knee joint. I'm going to run out of joints if I keep using humies, but we're going to run with it all the same. And then there's a third joint, call it a ankle joint, because again, running out of joints. And then finally, there's a final joint system where the aforementioned adjustable foot pads, i.e. fingers or toes or whatever you want to call them, grabby things happen. Call that your actual toes in your body. I don't know. Like I said, this thing has more joints than you do on your legs, so it's really hard to kind of develop an analogy. My big point, not to be confused with the joint, is that the first joint out from the, quote, hip joint, end quote, is armed on all 8 legs. Yes, you in fact heard that correct. Each of these 8 legs has a primary connection to the body of the MT-AT, fine. And then there's an extension part of the leg going up, and then there's another joint. And then there's another joint after that, and then there's another joint after that. But that first joint out from the main body on each of 8 legs, yeah, each of those 8 joints has a twin-barreled adjustable blaster cannon mounted onto it, times 8. What? And suddenly, it's no surprise that this vehicle requires one pilot who's probably in charge of steering the entire vehicle and aiming those 2 laser cannons mounted under the chin of the command section of the vehicle. And then it also requires 2 gunners, because each gunner apparently is in charge of 4 different twin-barreled blaster cannon turrets on each of 4 moving legs per gunner. I have to assume that the gunners have some sort of droid support in that they designate targets on their vid screens, and the droids figure out which guns can fire when they're available to fire based on how the legs are moving. Because you want to know the really terrifyingly crazy thing about this stupid vehicle? Its maximum speed is somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 to 130 kilometers per hour. That's 55 to 80 miles per hour in freedom units. What? You have this massively overgrown, not quite technically arachnid, but I don't think anyone's going to be alive long enough to really count the number of body segments in this terrifying nightmare vehicle, screaming down at you at highway speeds, shooting you with 2 laser cannons and up to 16 blaster cannons all at once, all while it's bearing down on you and stabbing your squad mates with reckless abandon by way of its very pointy, grabby feet. And all the while, this stupid thing can scale whatever cliff wall you want to put in front of it, because after all, it has stupidly grabby, pointy feet, and it is in fact designed for mountain terrain. Shocking, given the name. So yeah, y'all want an actually decent walking combat robot? Here it is, shockingly, in the Star Wars universe. I mean, Star Wars has the AT-AT, which is absolutely horrible as a walking robot, and everyone basically accepts that. I mean, it's basically brought down by, no joke, working shipyard tugs. But the MT-AT, its base speed is 50% faster than the AT-AT, and no, it doesn't quite punch nearly as hard as the AT-AT, given how many laser cannons that thing has, but it has so many blaster cannons. Any infantry trying to, present a threat to the MT-AT will be basically instantaneously vaporized. If the Empire had actually fielded MT-ATs as opposed to AT-ATs on Hoth, they would have simply swarmed over the trenches, zapping the crap out of all of the rebels, and it would have been over in 10 minutes tops. I mean, I guess the rebels did have those few armored, very limited range of motion laser cannon turrets. But again, these MT-ATs have 2 laser cannons themselves. So zip in, blap, 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 and done. So for all of y'all who get so terribly upset about me trash-talking bipedal combat robots. Well, yeah, it's just basically the bipedal aspect of the problem that really upsets me. Because you can actually shoot out 2, 3, maybe even 4 legs of the MT-AT, and it can still actually move forward fairly decently. And it's armed on every single leg as well as underneath its head. And it's not trying to be a world-ending combat king of the battlefield. It's understanding that it's part of a combined arms system where, yeah, this thing will absolutely annihilate infantry. But any kind of close air support or any kind of large weapon system is going to have a heyday with it. So yeah, the TLDR, and if you've made it this far, the TLDR is entirely pointless, but all the same, the TLDR is redundancy is king and know your place. Because like I said, you could shoot off a couple, 3, 4 limbs of this MT-AT and it will still be combat terrifying. But also, it will only basically be combat terrifying to infantry. It's not trying to be some king of the battlefield for all purposes, forever, all times, blah, 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 so on and so forth, that mech warriors in the mech warrior universe are trying to be. It somehow fits into the universe better, despite Star Wars being entirely jacked up, than any mech warrior vehicle in the mech warrior universe. And y'all can cry about that statement as much as you like, but that doesn't stop it from being true. Bipedal robots in general have all kinds of uses. If nothing else, they are great forklifts. And like I said, if they are scaled properly, they could be useful in a combat environment. But any kind of technological advance that would result in a mech warrior style combat robot being a thing, a bipedal one specifically, would better lend itself to a quadrupedal, hexapodal, octopodal, whatever the hell combat vehicle, or just a fucking tank. Again, you can cry about it. I don't really care. It's still true. And either way, great maker love any infantry division, detachment, whatever you want to call it, that ever comes across an MT-AT. Because they are freaking hosed, man. And that's all from Sacred Cow Shipyards. Please be advised that any ship left on the docks for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Have a nice day.